Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is the weekly Schiller Institute dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche for Wednesday, August 2nd, 2023. I'm Jason Ross, filling in for regular host Harley Schlanger. So let's jump right into things. Helga, there is so much happening right now in the world. We have the International Peace Coalition's Humanity for Peace events, including in the United Nations in New York City on this Sunday, August 6th. We have the conclusion of the Russia-Africa Summit and further insights in terms of how this might represent a changing world picture. We have the change of government, the coup in Niger. There's a lot going on. Could you situate us? Where are we in the world? How do we think about this situation?
Well, I think we see a gigantic geostrategic realignment of a dimension. I think most people have no inkling yet of what is happening. Because when the Soviet Union disintegrated in 91, there were people in the United States, in Great Britain, and I guess in Europe also, who thought that this was the end of history, that, the liberal democracy would basically take over the whole world. And, so they started to proceed with the concept of an unipolar world, which involved many things which were not so nice, like humanitarian interventionist wars, which, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and these have produced enormous damage. Millions of people died. You had the color revolutions, the regime change, and I don't want to recount now the entire history of the last 30 years, but it has led to a tremendous backlash, a boomerang reaction, whereby now not only did the unipolar world not function, the world has long separated into a multipolar world or many polarities, which are in disorder right now. But I think, the key thing which has happened is that the countries who were supposed to be subjugated under this neoliberal regime, global regime, started to revolt. So what you have right now, and I obviously cannot go through everything with respect to US, Russia, US, China, which are major factors in this. But basically you have a situation where there is a complete realignment. For example, the traditional policy orientation of Russia. Russia immediately wanted to be integrated into the West after the Soviet Union disintegrated, even wanting to be part of NATO. But, obviously it didn't go this way at all. So, the sanctions, now you have the war in Ukraine. The net result of all of that is that the relationship between the West and Russia has completely collapsed. It's ruined probably for a long time until you have a real change, which could happen, but it would require a completely different approach. And Russia is now orientating towards not only China, not only Asia and the whole Eurasian development, but also especially to the global south, and there especially Africa. So, this is, I can only describe the enormity of what is happening. For example, just take one recent event. You had the coup in Niger. Now, the West African Economic Association, I don't have the name right now, they basically immediately threatened and told the military who had done this coup to reinstall the previous president, whereupon all of Europe, France, Germany, the EU, basically all came on the side of, the deposed president. And now, as a result of it, the ultimatum which was given to the military in Niger has been basically nixed, because in the meantime, Mali and Burkina Faso said that they would regard it as a military attack on them if there was a military action against Niger. Now, this is threatening to cause an entire bushfire in the Sahel zone, which could involve, many countries in the whole region. Now, obviously, there is a Russian factor, because many of these countries have a closer relationship right now to Russia than to their former colonial masters, especially in this case, France. So France-Afrique, the French dominance over the western part of Africa, is crumbling in front of our eyes. And what is the real issue? You will not read this in the mainstream media, but the real issue is that many of the firms which had helped in quotation for Niger and other countries to mine their raw materials. Niger has a very high percentage of the uranium which is being used in the French nuclear industry, but they bought it at basically preferential prices, which left only a very small margin of income, of profit to Niger. And the most profit was made by the international corporations, French corporations and others. So they obviously want to sever that now, because Africa takes it as its own right to, possess not only its own raw materials, but to, add to the value chain, to have semi-ready production, semi-finished production, even, industrialization, to basically become middle-income, normally developed countries. And that is their absolute right. And that is what is behind why, there is right now this entire realignment, because the Western countries, they do not even want to recognize that they still are sitting on a very high horse. Joseph Borrell from the EU is the most outspoken example, saying that Europe is a garden, a beautiful garden, and that all the rest of the world is a jungle, and one has to protect this garden against the jungle growing into the garden. I mean, that kind of Eurocentrism, and that's a very gentle way of calling the phenomena. I could actually say an underlying racism, which is behind a lot of these policies, where the Europeans and the United States and the British, they are not regarding the countries of the developing countries as equal, as partners. And that is very much experienced and recognized by the countries of the global south. And that is one very important underlying reason why they are aligning with China and the Belt and Road Initiative, why they are working with the BRICS, why you have 40 countries who have applied for membership in the BRICS. So it is a realignment where these countries want to have an own economic system, more just, more suited to their real development. They're going in the direction of, international currency, maybe even a reserve currency. But, that is really the conflict. So the West reacts with that by saying, we have to contain that, we have to have global NATO, more weapons to Ukraine. The Ukraine situation is getting more risky and more dangerous by the day. There are some people in the West who are completely out of their mind now, demanding, cruise missiles, like the Greens in Germany, clearly, designed to cross all red lines, because once you start hitting deep into the territory of Russia, this thing can go out of control immediately. So, I tend to agree with a recent statement by former UN weapon inspector Scott Ritter, who said that the doomsday clock of the atomic scientists, it's not 90 seconds before midnight, it's 0.001 second before midnight, because even the smallest incident mistake, misreading, miscalculation could lead to a big nuclear war. So we are sitting on a complete powder keg, and that is, why, if you look at all of these situations one by one, it's almost hopeless. Take Germany, for example. Germany right now is experiencing a collapse of dimensions, which is absolutely breathtaking. The policies of the present German government are ruining everything what was built up in decades after the post-war period, building up Germany from a rubble field to an industrial miracle. And that comes apart right now with a speed which is breathtaking. The whole country is collapsing. Industries are moving abroad, but also internally, the regulations of the EU, the coalition government, they make it impossible for anybody to work. So there are many things which are part of this extremely chaotic world picture, which is why we have said since almost a year now that you need to move to a completely new paradigm, because if you do not go back to an idea of development for all, for every single nation on the planet, you cannot solve these problems. So that is why we need a new security and development architecture, which does exactly that. You have to have a reorganization of a system which is essentially bankrupt, and then, basically start anew with the perspective of development for all. So I know this is a lot, but you asked me, so I told you my thoughts.
Thank you. So let me remind our viewers that if you have questions for Helga Zepp-LaRouche, you can send them in questions@schillerinstitute.org. If you're watching this program recorded as opposed to live, you can still send in your questions. We can always look at ones that came in earlier on these programs. So a few questions have come in for you, Helga, but I really I'm going to take the prerogative and pose one myself based on what you had just said, which is, is there any actual long-term thinking in the NATO world? I mean, at this point, de-dollarization is becoming an inescapable force. Due to sanctions and restrictions, more and more nations are moving to national currencies or newly created currencies for trade. Is the dollar land, is NATO even thinking of regaining the trust of the world in the future? I mean, the push for more extreme weapons for Ukraine, the insistence on the green policy, which is destroying German industry. Is there any plan beyond this immediate showdown of Russia and China? Is there even a thought about the future? Are they really this short-sighted?
Well, I'm looking hard every day if I find a sign of intelligent life among these people, but I have not found it. I have found that the establishment in the United States and, in Europe, continent, and Great Britain, they are not reflecting that their policies may be the reason why the world is going into this mess. They're self-righteous, they're sitting on a high horse, they're thinking they're the good ones, all the other ones are evil ones. And, if you look at the merger, for example, of the EU and NATO, they basically want to, have the same policy. Then you have the AUKUS in Asia, with Australia, the US, and Great Britain. Global NATO, they want to basically expand the NATO into the Indo-Pacific as if that would be part of the North Atlantic, which was the original idea of NATO. So you don't see any sign to say maybe we should abandon the idea of a Leviathan, because philosophically behind all of that seems to be the idea that the oligarchical view of Hobbes, of Locke, that the people are evil, and the only way how you can contain them is you have to have an all-powerful state, a Leviathan, except this is not a nation state this time. It's supposed to be a global system, global NATO, global monetary system, and you keep basically suppressing it. And, that I have not seen anybody who would say maybe the reason why China is making friends, and even Russia, which supposedly is to be the absolute demon, is gaining a lot of influence among Africans, among Asians. Maybe that has something to do that Russia and China are treating these countries of the developing sector, or previously developing sector, or now again with China developing, as partners, as equals, and as friends. As Xi Jinping said once at a big Africa meeting in China, he said, China is the friend of Africa. And that's what many Africans are telling you. And when you ask a government representative or a diplomat or even, engineers, professors, students, anybody you are meeting, what do you think is the relationship between this African country and Russia and China? The likelihood that they answer it's one of friendship is very high. I have not met anybody except the die-hard in the wool Atlanticists who would say that there is friendship between Europe and the United States. Not even among the so-called allies is there friendship. As a matter of fact, if your pipeline gets blown up, that's not exactly an expression of friendship, I would say. And there's good reasons to believe that Seymour Hersh has made a very good case on who is behind the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. So I think that I have not seen that the West would say we have to go back to the ideals of a John F. Kennedy, of a Charles de Gaulle, of a Konrad Adenauer. I have not seen anything of that sort at all. And therefore, I'm very, very worried what will happen, because I do not think that this thing will end peacefully. For example, the collapse of Germany, how can that end peacefully if everything is collapsing? The honest people who want to just work, the bakers, the farmers, the craftsmen, the engineers, just everybody, they would normally just do their work, but they're not allowed anymore to do it because the system is moving so much against them. I do not think this will end up peacefully. And that is, again, why we have to have a rethinking, and why more ordinary citizens have to start thinking like statesmen. What would you do if you would be the president, the chancellor, or minister president of your country, or the economic minister, the cultural minister? Because right now, I think we are facing a civilizational crisis of incredible proportion.
Thank you. There's a question that came in from Pat that I think follows up nicely on this. Pat asks, since finances and financial stability are crucial to peace in nations, how do you view the BRICS movement and Russia now reaching out to Africa with trade, plus forgiving $39 billion in debt? I have no trouble believing the U.S. was behind the Nord Stream pipeline disaster, plus the 2 attacks on the bridge to Crimea, and now cluster bombs. Is anyone speaking out on these atrocities? And is NATO crumbling and only held together by the media they own? Question from Pat. Thank you for your question, Pat.
Well, I think that NATO is crumbling. I mean, not yet by the appearance, but I think, if you do these kinds of things, what they are doing, basically I once had a Indian philosopher, a friend of many years, J.C. Kapoor, who would always say that the Western system is a armored consumerism, and in that way you can actually say that NATO is the security aspect of this gigantic system of the casino economy, whereby the rich become richer, the poor become poorer. And, if you look at even the recent energy crisis, there are some firms which become stinkingly rich, and the management and the stock owners, and the majority of the people get poorer and poorer. So I don't think that this will last forever. As a matter of fact, I think that NATO is, it may look all powerful, but I think it's a coloss on clay feet. I would say the same goes for the EU. The EU makes so many rules which are fundamentally against the interest of their of the member states of the EU, that it will not last for very long. Now, this will not be an easy thing. There is no magic bullet, no sudden solution, because you have right now a very difficult task of building a new organization, a new system, a new security order. I mean, I wrote some proposed principles, this I did last November, and these are 10 philosophical principles which hang together. 7 of them are programmatic, pertaining to the economic system, financial system, credit system, energy, health, food, naturally, poverty. But then 3 principles are basically giving it a philosophical grounding: natural law, natural science, image of man. I don't want to elaborate it here. You can read it, and I actually would urge you to read it. Now, that is a comprehensive approach. These 10 principles, they are short, but they're comprehensive, and you can actually discuss every aspect as a derivative of the principles I named. So what I suggest is that more people should study these principles. I'm not saying you cannot change it. I'm saying this is the basis for a substantive discussion. And then we should have many organizations, think tanks, universities, student groups, professors start to discuss seriously of how can we reorganize this world in shambles on the basis of taking care of the interest of every single human being on the planet. And then let's have a debate. And, hopefully we can form alliances of people of goodwill to shape the future together. I think the Schiller Institute has done a lot of groundwork. We had many conferences where we had top officials from many, many countries from all over the world. So that there is already such a motion. We are trying to organize a peace movement, the Humanity for Peace, but also the idea that every citizen should become a world citizen and really start to take care of the most fundamental problems of mankind. Because we need an intervention from ordinary people who have made the effort to educate themselves.
Let me ask a question that came in. And again, if you have questions, please send them to us, questions@schillerinstitute.org. If you're watching the show recorded, you can still send them in. We can ask them at the next program. This question is more on Niger and the broader region, from Munashe Chiwanza. Question: what is your take on the developments in the Western Sahel region, the removal of French influence in the region? Can NATO move in, and what are the likely results? I know that you addressed this in your opening, Helga, but perhaps there's more you could say on the region if you'd like.
Well, there is the danger that it could come to a larger military conflict. For example, France has a military base in the capital of Niger. The United States has a military base. It could be that they feel that they have to reinforce right now they basically are talking about having Nigerians militarily intervene, which would be a catastrophe already there. But you could see by the presence of the French military in Mali, also the Bundeswehr, that just did not work. They were kicked out. Now the Bundeswehr is leaving. So I think, the best thing would be that all the foreigners, non-Africans, would leave the continent and basically leave it to the Africans to solve the problem. I think, Africa right now is a rising continent. It's definitely, in my view, the continent of the future, because, you have so many countries who are right now really determined to end colonialism, to build up their industries, to build up, their economies, to have a, part in shaping the future, go into space technology, have nuclear energy in the entire African continent. So there is plenty of motion right now, and Africa will be the continent of the future if the human race does have a future. By the year 2050, there will be 2.5 billion people in Africa, most of them very young, under 20. That's a tremendous opportunity if we move now to create many productive jobs, so that, Africa could become the new most productive continent on the planet. But it does require that, this idea of meddling militarily to grab resources, to, just maintain colonialism in a modern form, that has to stop. And the more openly this is being discussed, the better, because, eventually we have to convince even the, majority populations in Europe and the United States that that is what they should support and not try to contain with military interventions. So the more open these questions are discussed, the better. And one extremely important example is what the president of Eritrea, Afwerki, said in a meeting with President Putin in a recent encounter in St. Petersburg. You can look at the video, it's on YouTube. It's a very outspoken statement, probably shocking to many, but I think that should be heard.
Well, following up on what you had brought up there about the need in particular for energy resources for development, let me pose, I think we'll take one more question today, but again, if you have them, send them in. Dear Mrs. LaRouche, this is from an energy technician. Dear Mrs. LaRouche, your husband Lyndon LaRouche developed the concept and proved that we need to increase energy flux density. How could we have opportunities in the multipolar economy so that we can develop new technologies in increasing energy use or energy flux density? Thank you very much.
Well, I think it's very clear that the African continent, for example, does need nuclear energy. The argument which is being made that the climatic conditions are so well, you have a lot of sun, maybe even wind, that does not change the fundamental problem that the energy flux density determines the level of productivity in the economy, and therefore there has to be a motion towards as quickly as possible to go to higher energy flux densities, leaving solar and wind and hydro, not hydro, but basically solar and wind, to very exceptional cases, almost negligent. While obviously coal and other fossil fuels, it's not the CO2. CO2 is actually quite beneficial to agriculture and other forms of life on the planet, but it's a waste, because you can use fossil fuels for chemical production, for other uses which are much more efficient in the overall production process. But that is why we absolutely should support what Russia is doing, what China is doing, India, Japan. Even Japan is going back to nuclear energy. And naturally, if there would be an international effort to even beef up to a crash program for thermonuclear fusion research, like the ITER in France, the ITER project, it's, I think, 36 or 33 or 36 nations working together. That's a very good approach. But why not have similar international cooperation to basically broaden the efforts of research as much as possible and really try a crash program? Because that would really then solve the problem of energy security for a very long period of time, because you would have ocean water as a fuel. And then in a second phase, you could go to a helium-3 as a fuel. And then you really would be for, again, a very, very long time out of the crisis. So I think there are many countries going in this direction already. And, for example, if you look at the whole green discussion in China, naturally they are saying they want to have a green economy, but they are not going out of nuclear energy, and they are not diminishing their very successful thermonuclear fusion program in Hebei province, the East Project. So I think there is hope that this can be done, but I think more countries should just put their efforts together to really go for crash programs on the fusion technology.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I mean, this is really exciting to think about the kinds of things that we should be working on, that we should be worrying about. In the news, we should be thinking about what's the progress towards fusion? How are we developing materials? Not, which weapons are being sent to Ukraine. I mean, it's really pathetic, the kind of trash that we have to deal with right now to get to the world that we ought to have. So, Helga, I think that given the time, it would make sense to ask if you have any final remarks that you'd like to offer, any marching orders for those viewing in terms of what we can all do to make sure that we have a world of research into nuclear fusion and the other things that you mentioned.
Well, I think, I know that there are a lot of people extremely stressed. You encounter them in all kinds of occasions. People are really stressed out because, if you're not a philosophical mind, in other words, if you're not used to, go to the depths and the bottom of issues, study the classics, study the original sources, if you're not a real truth seeker, you are being bombarded right now with news which are horrifying. I listened this morning by chance to a program which in the German radio where they discuss this factor that many people now have psychological problems. They need therapy of all kinds. And then the advice of the so-called expert was that people should turn off the news because it's too stressy. Now that is a great advice. You have an oligarchical system where they basically say, become completely stupid and then we can do whatever we want with you. That is not the answer. The answer is to basically, say that we are in a transitional period as it probably has never existed in all of human history. There was never the danger of the annihilation of the entire human species, because if it comes to nuclear war, then that's what very likely will be the result. So it is a scary situation. But on the other side, it's also already the light on the end of the tunnel is visible in the form of many countries in the world want to have a new, just economic order in which nobody is the hegemon. They all are equal, they're sovereign republics, and that order is about to come. It does require that you don't just read the New York Times and the FAZ and Bild Zeitung, but that you develop a little bit your own sources. Read our websites, Schiller Institute, the LaRouche Organization, Executive Intelligence Review, LaRouche Publications. Then you can branch out from there and read, other countries. You can read African newspapers, you can read Asian newspapers. It does require a little bit of work to get a balanced view. But then, after you have done all of that, you should join our mobilization for peace. And there is no better opportunity to do that than the coming, some have it Saturday, but mostly on Sunday, the 6th of August, which is the anniversary of the bombs on Hiroshima. And many people are really, extremely mindful of what that was. But bombs nowadays are 1,000 times more heavy and devastating than the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs were. So, that's a very important thing to reflect about. And then we have rallies. You can go to our website or go to the website of Humanity for Peace. I think we will list there many of the locations. I think we have about 7 locations in the United States. We have up to now about 15, 16 internationally. You can look it up. Go to these rallies if you can, or support it. Make a little rally in your own town. Get 3 of your colleagues. Make a poster. Hang, basically make a body shield and write, we insist on peace for the world. I think you have to join this movement and then contact us and become active with us, because right now, it's so much at stake. But I'm fundamentally optimistic, in the sense of Friedrich Schiller, that if good people unite for a plan, they can win. And as Schiller said, they can bend even the strongest arm of the tyrant.
Thank you. Thank you. So that site again for everybody, humanityforpeace.net. That's the clearinghouse for the events on this Sunday, August 6th, including as a major one, a rally for peace at the United Nations in New York City, as well as a concert of Mozart's Requiem in honor of those hundreds of thousands who lost their lives due to the atomic bombings in 1945. Helga, thank you again for sharing your time with us today, and we will look forward to getting your reflections next week after the events of this weekend. Thank you.
Till next week.